Josh and Frankie. What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, Primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations! We're at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Twitter. There's a Facebook page called, you guessed it, Primus Tracks. Patreon.com/Primus Tracks for all your patroning needs. Hi, patrons.
Hi, patrons.
That voice you hear is none other than the voice of Primus Tracks Towers, Frankie Berestein.
Hi, Josh.
How you doing today, Frankie?
I'm good, and you?
Oh, my goodness. I'm pretty excited, because we are talking about the Scheme, track 4 from the Desaturating 7 today, and it is a bass powerhouse of a track. How many times have we said that for a Primus tune? When we have a bass powerhouse track, we go to a frequent guest, the bass force behind the band Lespecial. Really, actually, the only reason he's here is so I can say this. He's really good at scheming. It's Luke Bemand!
Hi, Luke.
Yes. Hello,
I'm starting
boys.
to run out of rhymes, so I have to stretch
That was
them.
the best Beeman pun yet. They get better every time, but wow, how applicable, Josh. Very impressive.
Luke, man, how's it going? What's Lespecial up to these days?
It's going very well. Lespecial is, let's see, what have we got going on? It's a little bit of downtime for Lespecial before a big fall tour in November and December with our friend Sun Squabby, and we will be going up and down the East Coast for that. And we are right now just gearing up for our annual Getaway event at Club Getaway in Kent, Connecticut, where we have a weekend of activities and music workshops and music at night. And it's all in the quaint, rustic confines of the Berkshire Mountains in the town where I grew up. So that's really fun. And I have been gigging with a band called Funky Dogs Brass Band, which is a killer brass band I would encourage anyone to check out. And so I've been working on a lot of cool New Orleans second line music and brass, funk, and pop and soul. And as of this week, Desaturating 7 bass parts. So that has been my world.
Bit of a contrast there. So when you're learning these parts, that New Orleans vibe, I gotta imagine it stretches you in one way or another, right?
It's very interesting because I'm learning a lot of sousaphone bass lines.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're very musical. You know, a lot of the music harmonically isn't too intense. It's a lot of like 1/4/5 and blues forms. But the bass lines are just very different than you would think about them on a fretted instrument. You know, there are a lot of scale-wise arpeggios and, you know, different shapes that I would play on a bass aren't really, you know, it's just a different feel than what a sousaphone player would play. So it's making my brain work in new ways, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
The sousaphone, not well known probably anymore, but named after and invented by, I believe, John Philip Sousa, marching music royalty.
That's it. He's the guy, and I found that out through this band. The difference between a sousaphone and a tuba is a tuba was a concert sit-down instrument, and John Philip Sousa was the first one to march around with it, and that became the sousaphone. So
imagine the gams on that guy.
Yes, he has a powerful, he's a powerful man. I'll just say that. I could not walk around with that thing. I couldn't stand with it. I would probably collapse.
People were tougher back then. Well, that's really cool that you're stretching and finding new things in your downtime. From your main gig and then, you know, wasting your time here. So I appreciate that as well.
My pleasure, boys. My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, man. So today we're talking about The Scheme, track 4 from the Desaturating 7. And considering it's only 7 tracks, we are surpassing the halfway point today. This album's going to fly by. This one clocks in at a swift 2 minutes and 51 seconds. So Luke, you don't have that much to do, right? Wink, wink.
Yeah, Les packs a lot into 2 minutes and 50 seconds here. I'll say that.
For me, and I don't want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. For those of you watching on video, once again, that's patreon.com/Primus Tracks. I'm wearing my Sennheiser 595s or 599s. I don't remember the number. But I'm wearing them today because I was listening to The Scheme on these high-quality cans here, and I realized this record, I think, is made for this kind of listening experience where you got to put the things tight on your ears. I have a pretty nice aftermarket system in my car. I've got a pretty nice speaker setup here on my PC, excuse me. But it just doesn't compare to having it right here. And I think it's a product of the mix, the vibe, the sounds that they're making. But I feel like this record is best experienced with these things on my head. I want to hear from you guys on that too.
Yeah, I feel like it's a prog album, I could see like this album coming out in the 70s and people plugging headphones into a record player and listening to it with, a blacklight and a bong, as all prog albums should be experienced.
Kind of like the room you're in.
My room looks like right now. Full disclaimer, that is not a blacklight behind me. That is an LED strip, but double full disclaimer, there is a bong not far.
Oh, okay, yeah. I just thought it was a grow light.
No, I wish. It's just an LED strip.
Oh,
but
okay.
I can totally hear that. I mean, I was enjoying listening to the album on my Audio Technica headphones actually today as well, and I do think that there is something with such like a detail-oriented concept album that's really cool about listening to it in the confines of your headphones.
Mm-hmm. Frankie, how are you taking in this album when you put it on repeat?
I would agree that it's an audiophile record. I mean, there's tons of layers and details to enjoy. It's like I mentioned on previous episodes, it's extremely musical. So
right.
I remember the first time that I played it, as I mentioned before, I was blown away by all the tracks. But at that point, I hadn't received my physical items yet. The bundle had not arrived. So what I played was an official download that I was sent because I purchased the bundle. And I played that on my computer. It was decent enough, but it wasn't until I finally ripped the album to iTunes and then I heard it on headphones that I was just incredibly immersed in every detail of the record. For example, there's stuff on the Dream, lots of things in the scheme and the track that you really have to listen closely to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And once you discover them, it's like they stick with you forever and you look forward to them every time you hear the album. So I would definitely say that it's a record that you have to pay close attention to because of its structure. I mean, it's different from other Primus records. And on the other hand, it's also an album that requires attention because there's a lot to absorb.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the first few times I listened to it in my car. I thought, I like the songs, but it sounds flat as far as the production goes. But then putting it through some nice headphones, the dynamics are there, but on a narrower band. So through something like these, you can really hear it and really appreciate it. Am I talking up my ass, Luke, or does that make sense?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Frankie used the great word in calling it immersive. I mean, that's what like a great concept album is. And this album really is. I mean, it really, just from the first note to the end, I mean, it really puts you in that world, which is what, a great like prog album should do. And again, even just listening on my headphones, I'd been diving back into this record since you guys started covering it and really enjoying it and almost had forgotten how much I love this album. But even just listening to the scheme today on my headphones, even the bass line was more intricate than I had first thought, where I was hearing it and I was like, yeah, it's a lot of triplets and thumping. And then after listening to it a few times in the cans, I was like, oh, it's all triplets and thumping. Like it's almost, it's more subtly complex, like a lot of Les's bass lines. But yeah, it gives it a new life on headphones. I totally agree.
In terms of production and in terms of sound, this album was very welcome for me because I really like the tracks on Monolith of Phobos, but I was not crazy about the production.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and then Lime and Limpid Green is very harsh on the ears. Again, it's a great EP. The song selection is fantastic, but it's quite harsh to listen to, especially if you turn the volume up. And then the Desaturating 7 came along, and for me, the volume is just perfect. The production is fantastic. If I have to nitpick, the only thing I would complain about would be the thunder in the storm, which kind of hurts your ears if you're listening to the record on high volume. So I would often have to lower the volume as the Dream was finishing and then turn the volume up again after the thunderstorm.
How many thunderstorms do you get down there in Mexico City, Frankie?
Oh, it's quite frequent.
Okay. So you know that it's going to come out of nowhere and scare the piss out of you at 2 a.m,
Sure.
right? Yeah. Okay. I grew up in that stuff out in the Midwest. Luke, you've experienced that. So I appreciate it for that. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but I appreciate that for what it is. The record, because it is jarring. All right, so let's talk about the scheme. Frankie, you get to take it away, as you are wont to do.
All right, three things I would like to mention about the scheme. Let's begin with live history. It was performed at every single Ambush in the Storm tour date, and outside of that context, it was actually performed once in Guadalajara on January 18, 2019. That would be the sole performance of the track outside of the full album runs.
I trust that you were there.
Yes, I was there for it.
Yes.
They just did it like in the middle of the set?
Yeah, it was just inserted randomly in the set, along with the 7 and the Storm. Those were
cool.
the three tracks from the album that made it to the set list. Because by the time they got here in 2019, they were not performing the full album in its entirety anymore. That finished in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. So they gave you a taste of some tracks off the
Sure.
record. That's cool.
Nice.
The other thing that I want to point out is something that we already covered in the previous episode. Les switched bass guitars for these tracks during the tour. And as I mentioned, I asked him about it at the Q&A, and he mentioned that those tracks, and this one in particular, were very hard to play for him on the Rainbow. So the Hannewinkle bass was much more comfortable. The third point that I would like to mention is a question for Luke. We know that everything is relative, right? The last week I was very surprised in our conversation with Keio because all these years I had been considering the Trek as this incredibly complex thing, and he told us that it was actually quite simple. The complexity of the song was actually how it was structured and performed, but the bass part in itself is not very elaborate. In the case of this track, I think I have a similar impression. I believe it's quite complicated, but I would like to ask you two questions. First of all, Les mentioned that it's a tough song to play, but as I mentioned, it's relative because some tracks could be hard for him, but not for other bass players and vice versa. So how difficult really is it to play the scheme, Luke? And the other question is, if you compare the performance of the song on the album and the beginning of the tour versus the performances with the Hannewinkle, do you notice any considerable differences regarding the quality of the performance or the song?
Good questions. Well, first off, I want to shout out KO because I thought he did an awesome job on the last episode. The Carl Thompson, the Rainbow bass was so cool to hear. Yeah. And yeah, he just sounded great on every little Primus tease he did. I mentioned you guys earlier. It was really cool hearing him play. He's great, and he really emulates Les's tone so well, especially on this record. This is a tricky one for sure. You know, like I said a little earlier, I didn't quite hear how intricate the bass line was until I really started listening to it with my headphones and my bass in my headphones and in my studio setup. Just listening to it driving around in my car or with my AirPods on. It's a grooving track. It's cool. I could hear it's based around these triplet figures, but it's a lot busier and more intricate than I thought. So it's definitely a tricky one. You know, he packs a lot of notes into 3 minutes. But in terms of the overall pantheon of Primus songs, I don't know if I say it's like one of the top 5 most difficult. It's really just this one technique that once you have the technique down and you're comfortable playing it at a fast tempo, you can play the song. But that technique is still a tricky technique, which I'll get into a little bit more when we dive into it. And in terms of the Hannewinkle, I don't think, is that what it's called? The Hannewinkle? Am I saying that right?
I think so.
Yeah, that's right. Correct, Josh?
The Hannewinkle, yeah.
Hannewinkle. I never saw that. I never saw that mythical bass. The song that I saw on this tour was at the Capitol Theater in Portchester, October 29th, 2017. It was a great show, and I'm sure you guys know, but for anyone listening that doesn't know, there's a full multicam of the set up on YouTube. And it looks awesome, and it's really helpful if you're trying to learn, say, the scheme, because they have some really cool close-ups of Les, and seeing his thumb doing all these triplets on the Rainbow bass is cool to watch. So I guess I don't really, I don't know the difference between the two basses, but I was hopeful that you were going to play some live cuts at the end of the episode where I could maybe hear that difference.
We've been playing that Portchester show a lot.
I heard it a lot. Yeah, it was a great show. Les loves playing at the Cap. Most musicians do. It's a beautiful room. And the production of the whole record was so cool, but especially at the cap, they had projections of the Rainbow Goblins up on the walls and up on that curved ceiling. So it was extra immersive, which was so cool. And I remember it really well, a couple days before Halloween, pouring rain. It was a very spooky evening. It was a killer show.
Oh, right on. You had the whole environment responding. Yes. That's great.
Great. And it was fun to watch him play the rainbow bass so much. And like you had mentioned on another episode, Frankie, he hadn't used the rainbow bass for quite a while, since Animals, right?
He did use it for side projects, but it's true, It had not appeared on a Primus album since Animals.
Right. So it was. I love how much how much he uses it on this record, and it just evokes a certain sound and creepiness that works really well here. So yeah, it's a doozy. It's a hard one. We'll see how I do.
I would describe the scheme as relentless. I think it's a relentless track.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just those triplets over and over again, and it's at a high tempo. It's somewhere around like 165 BPM, which is fast. And I think live it's even a little bit faster. So it is relentless. So I don't blame Les for using a different bass.
It is. I wrote the word driving because it just keeps going. There's really no slowdown, even in the interlude there where he's given us some of the muted versions of that.
It almost seems to just keep like ramping up in speed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I doubt they recorded it to a click, but yeah, it is. Relentless and driving are the words.
I have a visual aid, so those of you watching, patreon.com/PrimusTracks. This is one of my favorite rulers that I have because it does this.
Oh, wow.
And when I listen to the scheme, I think of how bendy and elastic that bass line is. So this is, to me, a visualization or a metaphor of that. So, Luke, you're here. You've got that nice fretless bass. How does he play it in such a way that it sounds like a rubber band?
That's a great adjective to use for Les. Elastic. I always thought it like the very first time I saw Primus live in 2003 on the Tour de Fromage, they opened with Tout de Fi, which I was like just freaking out at that point. And just, as like an 18-year-old kid, like jumping up as high as I could. Or maybe I was younger. I might have been like 15 or 16. Jumping up and down, trying to like, catch a glimpse of his right hand. And just being amazed at that like upright thumb, the way that it was bouncing off the E string on that Carl Thompson. And yeah, I described it to people as like looking at like a little like trampoline or something. So it is very elastic.
For sure. So we got a cool start to this one too. We have this goofball slide down the fretboard. I'll happily play it for those of you listening, wherever you may be. The scheme. Luke's going to show us this one. That is so less, and it's so this. It's such a bendy, it's so goofball.
I like the term goofball slide. Like I said, this song is built around these triplets on the right hand. So that is kind of just as he's sliding up, so I've got a 5-string fretless. Obviously the rainbow bass is a 6-string with a high C, but a lot of these songs you can do with a 5-string. A lot of them utilize the low B, but there's ways to hit the notes he hits on the C string on the G. For example, this song where he does pop an open C, and that he's just sliding down from a high A, so up at the 17th fret on your A string. It's just like this. And that's that's the goofball slide.
And we're getting some of the rhythm in it too. Boop, 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 because I hear that triplet, boop, 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 at the very start, and we get that quite a bit throughout the track. So there's a bit of a preview. And then slides right into our main part. Good luck, man. What do you got?
Thanks. Yeah. So, it's built around this triplet where basically what he does is he's doing like a double thump with the right thumb, and he's doing a hammer on mute with the left hand. So that creates this. And he uses that in a lot of songs. The most noticeably in My Name is Mud, just in the verse. That.
Oh, sure.
It's similar in the verse here with a lot of these hammer on mutes. So, and it's very rhythmic. So on its own, it sounds a little bare bones. But I'll just play that kind of intro riff for you guys from the goofball slide. into the verse, which is also similar.
So for as busy as that is, it's very percussive. So he is giving Larry a lot of space to put something over that. And in that particular part, actually, I just wrote that Larry is playing a lollipop the entire time. Like, that's the imagery I get. So it's this funny lollipop lick that's very bright. So to me, it's a strawberry lollipop. It's just this bright. I love this.
Exactly. It's like a little jaunt. Yeah, it reminds me of like a Zelda video game or something. Like, you know, some small like 8-bit sprite kind of lifting up a sword to boop, 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 like, you know, you get the princess from the castle and you raise the sword, and that's Lur. He's got the princess and he's raising the SG or whatever guitar he uses on this one.
I think this is another great example where Lur came up with a really, really cool guitar part to fill the space and to go along with the bass line.
Yeah, I agree. And especially like later in the song where he does it more of a call and response, where he's in drop D, I think, and he's just doing that, you know, that those low distorted, just kind of I would think just with an open D, A, D, G, or just D, A, D kind of power chord sound. And it's call and response, so it's like the, you know, he's alternating, which is really cool there, and that gives the song that motion, because the bass line really is just kind of more of a percussive, rhythmic, chugging line. There's not a lot of notes. He hits that high C on the verse. The only real difference is every like 4 bars or 2 bars, depending how you're counting it. I count it kind of like every 4 fast bars. He's just hitting a high C, so you can pop a high C if you've got a 6 string, or just a, you know, the 5th fret on your G string. So so that's where that's coming from. That's just him doing like popping a high C. It's, again, just more rhythmic than anything.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like that percussive bass line, it could have come from a couple of places, but it sounds like noodling, for one, plunking around and seeing what sounds good, but also it just sounds like a rhythmic exercise, and a lot of guys who compose will just be doing an exercise and then go, oh, that sounds good. You know, some variant on that.
Yeah, I think that's totally true, especially with like technique heavy slap songs, you know, like one of my favorite tunes by Marcus Miller, who's an amazing bassist who's played with Miles Davis, but he has some great solo records. He has this song called Bruce Lee that he wrote just based on warm-ups he was doing, because he would watch Bruce Lee movies while he would warm up in the studio. And it's just kind of like this, it's very similar to that. It's just kind of this like sliding down and doing like a double thump kind of thing. And he was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. And it became a track. And it's one of my favorite tracks on the record. So I'm sure with Les, a lot of the time he is just kind of sitting there, whether he's, you know, hanging out in his studio or he's working or watching TV or whatever, and just kind of doing some slap maybe exercises. And again, it's like, it's demanding and difficult, but for Les, it's pretty effortless and it just kind of grooves. And I think that like marching, just kind of, you know, like we were saying, that chugging nature of the song and how fast it is, you know, that's where he throws in some of these other fills. And they're just kind of these like little half step hammer-ons that he just kind of throws around that just kind of keep the momentum going. So it's like sometimes it'll kind of be like, you know, and then the really long one. You know, like
yeah, and we're getting that underneath the verses, right?
Yes, he does that kind of in the first verse before the chorus, and then he does the long one after the chorus.
Okay.
What you just played, Luke, sounded remarkably similar to Up on the Roof.
Yeah, It is similar to Up on the Roof. That's a good point. It's a lot of that double thumb triplet stuff. That's a hard one to play on a fretless, but we played it a lot with Mike Dillon, actually, when we toured with Mike D out in Colorado last month. So Up on the Roof is one of my favorites.
Yeah. It is reminiscent, Frankie. That's a good pull on that one.
Totally.
I'm curious about right after that verse. I'm calling this the chorus, but it might just be the B part. So after our first verse, we get a continuation, but there's a vibe change. So let's hear that part. This right here.
And they laugh and fantasize about the prize with the
So Lur's given us a heavier guitar part there. Herb switches to the ride cymbal, everybody's favorite, aka mine. What's Les doing different there?
Yeah, I would totally describe that. I think you could call it the chorus or the B part. Generally any Primus song, when there starts to be a chord change introduced, it's a different section or a chorus, you know? And I love how short the chorus is. Yeah. And I've heard you guys talk about this record, how, and even KO and different people have said like, oh, I wish there was more at the end. I love the brevity of a concept album. I love just like existing in that world, fully immersed and fully focused for 30 to 45 minutes. And, a lot of those 70s prog albums couldn't exceed like 43 minutes to be printed on vinyl. Right. So that all like really works for me. And I love that like there's this chorus and it's so fast. So basically the chorus, he takes a little bit of a break from those relentless triplets until he gets back to that low D note. So it's like So it's really, it's really fast. It's just 2 bars of G. That's just 1 bar of G, 1 bar to A flat. If you're on your E string, it's your 3rd fret up to your 4th, then back to that low D on your 3rd fret. And then the second chorus, so the second time it goes around, it's actually 1 bar of 6. So it's 2 bars of 4 and 1 bar of 6 where he adds in an E. So he adds in an E, which is just, it also, it's not like it makes it feel any longer, but it's just kind of a cool little tag on a short chorus. So it's not a lot of chord changes, but it's enough to give the song a little bit of a change there. Yeah. And you have the luxury right now of modeling a part and then taking a break. Yeah. So this is, and we're not going to make you play it in real time unless you want to, but and knowing that you have to keep that up for 2 minutes and 50 seconds, you mentioned a track like Mud where there are some natural pauses. I mean, it drops out, and that's by design, whereas here, it is continuous. I don't even know if he takes any rest whatsoever. I don't think he does. I would say that this is almost like Mud on expert level. Because, like Mud, you get a break. Yeah. Rest. Yeah. Rest. You get these rests, so you can really like hone in on those triplets. This is just relentless. Because it sounds like, when you're listening to it, it sounds like he's just doing this. That's what he's doing just in the right hand. I mean, he's muting constantly with the left hand. So that's what gives you that fast triplet feel. Yeah, it's an expert level triplet.
Okay, that's very interesting because listening to the album all these years, I was under the impression that he did get some semblance of rest before the coda of the song in the last muted part. That
breakdown where he's kind of
where he's whispering.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's more similar to Mud, where it's full on mute. It's hard to do these triplets when you're down on the 3rd fret on a B string because you're muting the string, but the string is not tight. The string is still very loose. Big, thick, low B string when you're muting it just at the 3rd fret. When you watch him play Mud live, he's always got his foot up on the footrest, and he's playing in like the middle of the neck, right. And the string's just a little bit more taut there. It's tight, and it's almost easier to do that kind of like elastic, triplet thumbing. And he does it in the breakdown. You can see it on that Capitol Theater show on YouTube. He totally assumes the Mud stance, where he's kind of like the bass is up a little bit. He's kind of resting it on his knee, and he's more in the middle of the neck. And I think that is kind of his break in the song, even though it's not. It doesn't really stop, but that's where he's just. And even that is a little bit less strenuous to play. So for less taking a break, it's just muting it more, I guess, instead of resting. Yes, because when you talk about how that string is looser when you're way down there on the fretboard on that 3rd fret, there's going to be some resonance. And so listening to it, once again, on really high-quality headphones, I think I'm hearing some of that resonance. Leaving that in there for production value, so you can you kind of hear what's happening. It's a little rough around the edges, and that's kind of the Primus
aesthetic anyway. But that particular part, I'd like to play it because when I was listening back, I wrote that in that part, Les is playing like something that's grunting at you from the brush when you're out in the forest, and you don't really want to find out what the thing is. So you want to get the hell out of there because it's grunting, it's making a lot of noise, right? It could be a wild boar. I don't want to run into it. Right here. I think I'm hearing that resonance too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Herb.
It's like the string sound. It's the sound of him muting the string.
Yeah, it's great. And then with Herb coming in with that 1 2 3 4, which he does quite a bit throughout the tune with that pattern, it's a strange feeling, and I don't want to be there. Not from the song. I just don't want to find out what beast is about to leap out and claw me.
It is very menacing, creepy part of the song.
Yeah, and then it precedes that lollipop, which I love very much.
It's almost like, you know, I'd have to like really listen to it with headphones and my bass to pick up that exact harmonic, but that harmonic would just come from wherever he's muting the string on the neck with his left hand. So it's almost like, so knowing less, like, and seeing on the Cap video, which I watched earlier, it's like up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't sound like quite like the right overtone. You know, it's so faint, but it's like that resonance does create a tone, and that's kind of, you know, when I'm playing the verse, those triplets just on my own, you know, it sounds kind of weird. Not because I'm not playing it completely perfectly. Just kidding, I'm not. But like, it's because there's so much going on in the track when he's playing that. So you're just hearing those rhythms. You're not hearing, you know, the muted string overtone, which you can totally hear in that breakdown when there's less going on.
Right. So, and that's an important point, you know, for a non-musician like me. Where you place your hand, it's going to create, a subtle tonal difference. It's like a puzzle, and you have to solve it, and it's almost like you got to listen to those microtones or scour YouTube to see exactly where he's positioning himself.
Luke, I want to ask you a question. If you had to perform the Desaturating 7 in its entirety, which would be the track that you would be the most nervous about? Would it be the Scheme?
Yo, that's a great question, because I literally the other day when I was listening to this, I was like, man, this would be such a fun album to do at like a Halloween show. Yeah. Just like, and I hope that maybe in 10 years and 20 years, this is looked back on as like an epic concept album. You know, maybe not as to the level of like, you know, Dark Side of the Moon or like In the Court of the Crimson King or these like Goliath, you know, like 70s prog tunes. But how cool would that be to hear a band do the Desaturating 7 in its entirety and wear the cloaks? And because I just love that. The whole like dark fantasy aesthetic of the record and of the live show is so cool. And I love that it came out around Halloween. It all just worked so well. But, you know, now that I've worked on this song, I think I could do this live, but it might be the track. Like, after listening to KO play it, I was like, damn, man, like, this is tough. He was playing it off like it wasn't that hard. Like, it is. Those fretless chords he's playing in the verse, and then the bone to bone to bone to bone, that's a hard one, man. But it's definitely these two songs. You know, these two are like the centerpiece of the record. When they were just releasing singles for it, as soon as I heard the 7, one of the times he debuted it was at the Pavilion in Boston in like 2017 or 2016, and I recorded on my phone, like went home that night and tried to figure it out. But like, just that. So like that's a cool one, but that's not that tricky. But I feel like bass-wise and compositionally, the Trek and the Scheme are like the apex of the album and most difficult ones on bass for sure.
Bass player
Interesting.
What would you think? Would you feel like it's the Trek or the Scheme?
Each player has a real challenge ahead of them when they perform the 7. For example, in the case of Lur, all the acoustic passages are very intricate.
Yes.
In the case of Les, the Scheme is tough. In the case of Tim Alexander, I'm not sure if he had a particular hard time with any of the tracks.
Yeah, but they'd be hard to emulate. I feel like the hardest song on drums to emulate would be the Trek. on those big tom hits, and it's very orchestral and very Tim Alexander. You couldn't go play like a 4-piece Pearl drum kit and like play the track, you know?
Sure. And the fact that, like we mentioned, the fact that this was not jammed indicates that it was a piece of music that had to be learned perfectly and had to be replicated as closely as possible to the original material.
Right. This is one that's not been mined for territory as yet unexplored. And that's kind of surprising, actually, especially with a track like the 7 that's stuck around. Lalo said, you don't jam in 7/8. Like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the song that lends itself most to jamming, ironically, is like The Scheme. Even though it's so short, it's got that breakdown. I mean, it's almost similar to like the My Friend Fats breakdown. The I could see them like just stretching out on that and, watching the screens behind them and, kind of accompanying the visuals a bit more. So that's kind of ironic. I feel like one of the shorter tracks on the album could be the one that could get opened into the biggest, improv section.
Yeah, I think there's some stretching, and I want to play the Lure Lollipop part, aka the solo, because I think that's where the bottom drops out afterwards, and you could stretch that out, and Les can lead that. But here's that lollipop part, because it could lead to some jamming. But as Lura said in many interviews, I play shapes. I don't know what the shape is. It's nebulous, but I'm seeing some kind of shape take form here.
I love the last note. It's just like a squeak.
It's so great. That's the lollipop popping out of your mouth. Yeah. When you show it to somebody. Want a lick?
There's a good guitar pun in there somewhere. Maybe
there is. And I totally walked right over it. Bummer.
I got you.
You're picking me up there. So but right after that, with that percussive muted part, something could happen, I suppose, live. But to keep it, I suppose on the tour, when you're touring the album, you just want to show them the record right there in the middle of the set and move on. But yeah, I think there's something there that could be mined in future years.
I mean, it does. Yeah, it almost does like evoke almost like the Wonka stuff. I mean, it's just kind of that creepy like vaudevillian circus thing.
Yeah.
And that part in the song right before the breakdown is the one part I didn't talk about, where it's somewhat of another change, where it's just like.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just again doing the triplet thing, but it's just going up a half step. It's G to A flat to G flat to G, or G to G sharp to F sharp to G. It's just like this. It's very chromatic.
Yeah.
And that that kind of like circus music thing that like Lure does a lot is very chromatic. So I'm picking up what you're putting down, man. We're going to the circus with Lure. There's lollipops. There's little fucking wonkites. I'm with you. Lure land, baby.
Josh, can you play the laugh and fantasize about the price part? Because I really, really enjoy the music in that section. And I love what Lure is doing. Yeah.
And they laugh and fantasize about the price. With the colors fresh and creamy, they will stretch upon the rise.
And that part is so cool. What's going on with the bass there, Luke? Is that like some kind of delay? What is that? It's fantastic.
Yeah, just like the chorus or the part B part, it's still implementing the muting, but just kind of doing it, with that little chain.
Yeah.
So it's just putting a little bit of motion in there, which he stops doing the triplets a little bit right when he's on that G to A flat. But he's going right back into it. I mean, it's a very short chorus and it's a very short break, which just contributes to that.
It's a mini build-up, right?
Yeah, I'd say, you could call it like whatever. It's a chorus, a mini build-up, a change, a B section. It's so small, it's hard to label, but it's a really short track, so it's noticeable.
Yeah. I like the flourish with the Bubbletron, too, from Larry there. Gives a nice touch. I want to play that part again because we haven't really talked about the vocals yet, and I think the rhythm of the vocals in these B parts, choruses, whatever you want to call them, there's a variance in them that I'd like to point out. So I love the sing-songy one of this. So if you're watching on the video, you're going to watch me shake my finger back and forth to identify those beats right here.
And they laugh and fantasize about the prize. With the colors fresh and creamy, they will search upon the rye.
Na 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 na. Very sing-songy, right in line with the rhythm. Really great lyrics. Of course, lifted from the book. We'll talk about the lyrics momentarily, but laugh and fantasize about the prize. He actually gets up there and he's singing notes again. I probably missed it, but he's getting up there somewhere.
That was pretty good, actually.
Oh, thanks. I didn't warm up.
I mean, he probably didn't either.
Yeah, right. He's doing that, and then when we get to the next one, at 1 minute and 18 seconds, once again, Les can flow when he wants to enjam or insert the word ramifications into this 165 BPM chorus. It just sounds great.
And they laugh and carry on without the fears of knowing the ramifications of the walls with tiny ears.
He's spitting right there. That's awesome. And it's just a little variant because he was sing-songing the first one and right on meter, and then he breaks it in the second one, which is something that he does to great effect throughout, all his lyrical deliveries throughout his career. In a pop tune, or almost any tune, the chorus is almost identical every time, but here we're getting different pieces and different sounds. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's again, like, to enunciate that way at such a fast tempo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something obviously we know Les can do in, like, Tommy the Cat and stuff like that, but yeah. It's impressive. It's not easy to do that.
Of knowing ramifications of the walls with tiny ears. That sounds awesome. I love it. When I do it right, it sounds awesome. The other one is that I want to point to is after that muted, after the lollipop, so I'm going way ahead here, close to the end. The looseness with which he says schemers always scheming and they're scheming all the time, because he's in meter when all the instrumentation is going. But when it's just him doing the muted part, he gets loose with it, once again, to great effect for me. That laugh, too. Scheming all the time. It's great. So he can play with that. He can play with it when all the instrumentation is going, but he chooses to when it's just himself, and Tim providing those four kicks. Once again, I really love how loose he gets it and spreads it out. Just little things. It's 2 minutes and 51 seconds, so you got to look for those little things. And I'm a fan of the vocal delivery and all the instrumentation here.
I love that little laugh too that you had pointed out. This song, it definitely is kind of the song that, like, emulates the Goblins. It's like this song I feel like is like the most mischievous. Like these like little mischievous plotting fellows marching along, and that's kind of the song. It's like this triplets just marching along.
Right. Well,
Goblins.
You raise a great point there, because if we were to turn to the book by Ulderico, as I hold in my hand. The scheme is actually goblins talking about what they're going to do when they get to the Valley of the Rainbow and how they're going to get all the colors. So we're introduced to the Valley on the record. We get to know the seven and who they are, and the trek is the trip they're on, and then the scheme. So we're getting to, here's the plan. So yeah, this should be the slinky, elastic, skullduggerous one, for lack of a better term.
Skullduggerous. That is a new one.
I think you can do that with the word skullduggery. I think you can use it as an adjective.
What is skullduggery?
Oh, underhanded manipulation, nefarious actions.
Wow. I learn a new word every time I'm on this podcast. Thank you.
Skullduggery.
Amazing.
SKULLDUGGERY.
I'm writing that down.
There you go, man. Fun fact, when I was in 9th grade, I got second place in the high school spelling bee.
I believe that.
Also, I was wearing a yellow raincoat and yellow rain pants and giant rain boots that day. Just to be weird.
You look like the kid from It, basically.
Pretty much. And the student council president who beat me, I think I creeped her out. What are you going to do?
Amazing. Amazing side note.
Thank you. Speaking of the lyrics, if you guys want to talk about them, I really like the structure of the song itself, but the lyrical similarities in those choruses is enough to be intriguing, as I mentioned. But in such a short song, and I talked about this with the 7, Frankie, that he says the number 7, I don't remember, 777 times. In this one, we get the word scheme or the word scheme in some form, schemers, scheming, scheme, 12 times in that compact of a track. So, but it's funny because in the last verse, he changes it up to scamming. We get the word scamming in there. So we get a little change up at the end, which is a really smart synonym and linguistically similar word to scheme. And I suppose it avoids the bad luck of saying the same word 13 times. I don't know. Luke, are you superstitious when you're writing songs? Are you avoiding that stuff?
I can't say I'm thinking about that kind of thing.
Okay, good. I mean, if you're writing a song in 13, that's totally different, right? Because you're just asking for it at that point.
Well, I am a big fan of when bands, utilize odd time into the lyrics, or like just a lot of songs like that are in 7/4 have 7 in the title. I mean, like obviously with this, the 7 and 11 and stuff like that. And I am a fan of like numerology on albums like that, but it might be a stretch to say he was being superstitious to not say it 13 times. But I like where your head's at.
Does that mean 46 and 2 is in 46 2 time?
Well, that's a great question. But that's the song like Lateralis, that's a song that's like written up based on like the Fibonacci sequence. It's like a bar of 9, 8, 7, 6, like that. The numerology is deep with Tool, and sure. I nerd out to that shit for sure. That's a very prog thing to do, I guess.
You're not wrong. There's a lot of links to the book, of course. In the book, there's scheming in the cave. And I think the word scheme is in there. The scheming in the cave. Les works into the lyrics the phrase, with the colors fresh and creamy. With the colors fresh and creamy, they will snatch up on the rise. From the book, we actually get one of the goblins saying, hey, we'll get those colors when they're fresh and creamy, right when the sun comes up. So he's pulling that straight from the book. And it has to do with, here we go. When they're in the cave here, scheming on it right there. And this is it. This is your lines of text for the scheme. That's about it. If you don't have this book, by the way, go get it. It's awesome.
Yeah, is it available to just like order on Amazon or something? You can find it?
I believe it's still in print.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to graph.
Yeah.
Things I'd like to point out about the lyrics.
Yeah.
Schemers always scheming and they're scheming all the time. It just flows out of the tongue so amazingly.
Yes.
What a well-written lyric. And it reminds me of so many other occasions like Follow the Fool, where Les is using this literary resource, right? That he's using a specific word to build and then goes back to it and then goes back to it.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty effective.
Once again, that's one of those things that authors and writers do. They'll use repetition for effect. And this is for effect. So you get schemers always scheming all the time. Now that's going to make for flat characters because that's all they're doing. But the repetition of 12 times of the word scheme is really important because this is who they are and this is what they do. He's hammering it home. So you make a great point there, Frankie. It's also one of those things.
Enamoring the masses less than wise. The most successful schemer is still the most colossal lies. This is, again, a point where I know that the lyrics are inspired by the book and it's a conceptual piece. However, this is one example, similar to another lyric that we discussed in The Valley. I think you can take it out of context and it could speak about what was going on in the world at that time.
I think this is a departure. I think you're right.
Yeah, politics, social topics, pretty much anything, even history, right?
Because I don't think anybody in this book is lying, other than the hubris of saying, "Hey, look at those." The one of the goblins says, "Haha, look at those roots in the cave trying to eavesdrop on us. It doesn't matter." By the way, because the moon already heard their plans, and the moon told the valley what was going to happen. Spoiler alert! But
really? That's so cool. That didn't make its way into the album in any way, did it?
I'm not sure. I'll have to read the Dream in the Storm lyrics more closely, but in the book here, the roots are listening, but the hubris of the goblins is, who cares? And that's when those, the most devious schemers, they don't care if they're being heard because they're just going to build or compound the lie or tell a bigger lie, to cover it up. And I think that's where the departure takes place, Frankie, is this could be commentary on someone or something from that time period. We don't have to get into it because I don't want to talk about it. But you can extrapolate.
Transfer. It's because there's no names in particular.
Right.
You could apply that lyric to pretty much anything throughout history, and that's also a genius stroke, in my opinion.
Right.
The other thing that I want to point out is that They laugh and carry on without the fear of knowing the ramifications of the walls with tiny ears, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall, Josh, how Soya kept using the word ramification throughout the episodes of Punch Bowl?
No. How did you glom onto that?
It was his favorite word at some point. He mentioned that he was actually told to stop using it.
I don't remember this. That's hilarious. So maybe that
Soya's
seeped
always
in.
looking for ramifications.
Yeah. But maybe that word then seeped in, and it works perfectly there. So the walls with tiny ears, those are those roots in the cave. So he's alluding to what's happening in the story there. So he's generally telling the story. Schemers, wretched scheme on into the night, always formulating plans, while tucked well out of sight. They're in the cave, and that starts to bring up the dark light dichotomy too. They're scheming in the dark. The light of the moon exposes them, and that's when their scheme is, I suppose, spoiled by the light of the moon. So you've got that dichotomy going too. Not that we have to go down that road, but it's a commonly trod path.
Just want to repeat, incredibly well-written lyrics.
I think these are some of his best, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody that's so creative normally, to have this kind of framework, it is really cool to see like how it ignites that creativity.
Yeah.
To take like a, illustrated children's book and to like, weave these lyrics out of it. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, a question for you, Luke, because Lespecial generally is playing instrumental music, but here and there you've got some tracks with lyrics. So who's writing those lyrics, and are you guys bouncing things off of each other for those when you have those tracks?
It's mostly Johnny. He, I only sing a couple tracks, and the track that I sing, I've written the lyrics for. But Johnny writes his lyrics, I think, based on like different things. You write about what you know and about what inspires you. So he has lyrics sometimes inspired by people like Terrence McKenna, who's somebody that he listens to a lot. And I have a song that we recorded that it hasn't been released yet that is kind of probably showing my like Les Claypool fandom, and it is a bit more of like character driven and like a song, and it's about a cannibal Cajun guy that has a sandwich shack actually, so it's got Claypool written all over it. Really, that's an early drop. That's gonna be off the forthcoming album. Nobody's heard that. Yeah, that's a Primus Tracks exclusive.
Luke made a great point. I can relate to that because I enjoy making music, maybe every 5 years or so. It takes a while for me to do something new. But at the beginning, I think when you're approaching music making, it's relatively easy to come up with instrumentals. However, when you start feeling that desire to write words for the music, you discover how incredibly hard it is. And I think you reach a roadblock, or you have no idea what to say until you discover that ancient tip which you just described, which I think is essential for any writer. Don't try to write about things that you don't know or things that you're not familiar with, because it could either come off as very awkward, clunky, or even phony, right? So regardless of how unusual the subject matter is, if it's something that you're passionate about, or if it's something that you have particular knowledge in, it's going to translate well into a piece of music when you write about it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was a high school English teacher told me that, and it always stuck with me. Just write what you know. I'm sure you've told students that, Josh. And,
sure.
I mean, there's a reason like every Stephen King novel, the protagonist is a writer.
Living in Maine.
Exactly. Shout out Stephen King. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
And it's also why Les's writing is full of people that he knows.
It's not just a matter of convenience. It's actually being able to mine territory you're familiar with.
Yeah. And it's also just interesting to see how Les uses source material like this. Like, I don't know how inspired he is by goblins normally, but, like he's clearly, this book, struck a chord or resonated with him on some level so much that he made a concept album about it.
You have a great point, Luke. I think the fact that we mentioned that the last portion of the lyrics could refer to anything social, political, or historical is a reflection of how personal Les's writing can be, even if he's not talking about himself, even if he's talking about a social observation or another person, he always tries to incorporate that human element into the lyrics. It reminds me of an interview from the Monolith of Phobos period where he said that the creation of the title track was very interesting because Sean Lennon was telling him that there was a monolith in the Phobos. It's a moon, right?
Moon of Mars, yeah.
Sean Lennon told him that it's apparently there and people know it's there, but I mean, nobody can explain why it's there. And, he was going on about it in scientific terms, and then he drifted off to sleep. And when he woke up, Les told him that he had written a song about it, and that was Monolith of Phobos. The interesting thing is that Les mentioned that even though he was interested in what Sean was saying, he never considered approaching the song from a scientific perspective. He said he wanted to write a song with a more emotional approach. So he was writing from the perspective of the astronaut that was contemplating the monolith. So he was more interested in the human factor than the scientific one. I think that is reflected all over his writing.
Yeah, that's deep. That's a great point. Just to elaborate that a little bit further, because that's interesting you bring that up, Frankie, like the perspective of different people and how you would approach subject matter. I don't know if you guys have talked about this on the podcast yet, that originally Les had conceived this concept to do with Claypool Lennon Delirium, to do the Rainbow Goblins album.
Right.
And, that would have been interesting to see, but I'm so glad that they did it through the lens of Primus.
Yeah.
Because, obviously it's so cool to hear Lur and Herb do it, but to hear their personalities and their parts and to just get it in that Primus context is one of the reasons that this album is so great. So, and I would have been curious to hear how that would have sounded, but I'm glad that we got it, from the lens we did.
Yes, and in terms of the Desaturating 7 in particular, Les very well could have just translated the book into an album. I think that because of the context of what was happening in the USA in particular at that time, I don't think he could have stayed quiet about it and not say something. And I think he managed to slip some messages into the lyrics of the album, but because it's Les, it was not overt, it was not obvious, but if you listen carefully, it's there.
Yeah.
But it's so well written that it's not dated. Like we mentioned, you could apply those principles to pretty much anything, right? I mean, just like other songs that deal with tragic characters are cautionary tales that Les is trying to give you about drug use, for example. I think there's also a cautionary tale in the Desaturating 7.
All right. Should we hear some live cuts?
Let's check those live cuts.
Hey, Luke, Port Chester, Capitol Theater, 2017. Now's your chance to say it.
I was there.
Let's hear the intro of the scheme. You got to remember, Luke was there, trying to watch Les's hands.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Lur's tone is great there.
The bass does sound remarkably elastic.
Yeah. I'm just listening to those triplets over and over and over. Oh, there was that open string.
Yep, that high C.
That goofball slide was in full effect there at the intro. That sounded good.
Yeah. It was actually cool there. On the record, it sounds like he starts up from that high A 2 times in a row, and then the third one, he starts from a little bit higher, but that one, it sounded like he got a little bit higher every time he did the slide, every time he started the slide from a higher point, which was pretty cool, actually. I preferred that.
Good catch. So there's the intro from Port Chester. That's all Frankie wanted to play. Sorry, Luke. But we're actually going to a different place. We're going to Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, man, this show was kind of a heartbreaker for me because we played at Brooklyn Bowl the same night, and we were doing our Lespecial event, and when I saw the tour drop, I was like, okay, where's the New York date? Oh, yep, it's the same date as us, and we couldn't make it an after party because Brooklyn Bowl doesn't go late, so we had some people come through the show right at the end of our show dressed as goblins, which was cool.
Yeah.
But this show's kind of the bane of my existence at that brief period in time.
Oh, well, let's hear portions of it. That one sounded more deliberate. So he must have found something he liked there on the goofball slide to change from the record.
Yeah,
Or he was making time to remember the lyrics.
I think it almost makes more sense in this context that each time it would start from a different point. It's like on the record, it's almost a little bit random that it's like only the third one is from. You would think like either everyone has the same starting point or it gradually gets higher rather than just one. So I kind of prefer that live version of the intro.
Yeah, right on. Ooh, yeah. His voice is interesting there. That's what I love about this track, that abrupt ending, too.
I don't know if you guys have been to Brooklyn Steel. It's a newer venue. It's like a big, cavernous, booming venue, literally with steel beams. Oh. Lespecial played there. We opened for Lotus once on a New Year's Eve run, and we had like an early set, so the crowd was still kind of like trickling in. And I remember it being like boomy and echoey as hell in there. And I'm sure they had a big crowd, but you can almost hear like those big steel walls in there. That would have been such a cool place to see the show. I'm still butthurt about that. I don't want to talk about it.
So the reverberations, you're hearing that in that recording?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a big room.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's hear some Lure from Brooklyn Steel.
Remnants of Lurland.
He pulled out the lollipop at the very end. I didn't know he was going to make it.
Nailed the squeak. That's amazing.
That shape, it sounded more sinister than on the record. Whatever dissonant thing he was doing there.
I think his distortion just sounds heavier and doper there. That even those open drop D power chords there sounds heavier than on the record. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just like his live rig. You know, it's going to be a little bit heavier and more sinister sounding.
Thanks for those, Frankie. One,
You're
because
welcome.
Luke was at one of them, and then the other one you hurt his feelings. So there's that. You know.
Did the camera record you during any portion of the show, Luke?
It's funny, you know, I was keeping an eye out, but no, it just kind of right in the front. I mean, the cap is so cool because the floor kind of ramps up, so I like to kind of stand like to the right of the soundboard, where I'm still like on Les's side, but the sound is really good. No, it was just like a bunch of big sweaty men around me. I know.
You know, when the Ogden shows were recorded for a potential release, and I remember on the first night, you know, I was at the front on the Lure side, and I saw the people with the camera equipment, and I told one of them, "Are you here to record the show?" And he said yes. So I told him, "Record me," because I really wanted to be on the DVD, and they did.
I wish they would release it. Do we know why that never happened?
No clue.
Yeah.
If it ever comes out, I'm going to be all over it.
That would be amazing. Even more people would buy it, knowing that you have cameos in it.
Yeah, what they should do at these types of shows is just have a camera fixed on Frankie. And then they can just cut to him.
The Frankie cam.
Anytime. Frankie cam. Yeah, Frankie fan cam. And so at the start of every track, we can watch him just flip his lid when he goes, "No, I know what they're playing." You know?
I agree. You could have just a GoPro like wrapped around your head. We could even have Frankie Vision.
Frankie Vision.
That would be awesome. Man, I didn't know that they had filmed that whole set. With that Ogden Theater is such a beautiful room. That would have been great for this.
It's a fantastic venue. Yeah, it's really wonderful and really, really great sound.
I got a couple of things to do here. It's this is part of our Patreon rewards. We get to once a month holler at our patrons and thank them for their patronage. And Luke, if you recognize any of these names, jump in and say hi to these wonderful people.
Okay.
So once again, patreon.com/Primus Tracks. There are 4 tiers of bonus content. One of them happens to be watching this right now. Luke's handsome mug is right there. His beautiful bass is right there. His grow light's back there. Yeah, if you want to play me through this, I'd love that. So I want to say thank you, and Frankie, I know you want to thank these wonderful people too. Here are our patrons.
Honestly, thank you very much for your support. It means a lot.
Big shout out to the following people: Carlos Arizmendi, Amber Porter, Kevin Lelowski, Keith Thompson, Chris Gentile, Yumi Kashi, Sculligan Val. You don't have to have your real name on Patreon. Although, if that is that person's real name, I'd be really impressed. Daryl Judd. Thank you, Daryl. Daryl was in on the ground floor when we got started on this thing. Mike Tuckerman, Simon Altman, Chris, Brian Kielb. I'm probably butchering your name. Sorry, Brian. Stephen Stang, Juhani Coho, Michael Andrews, Christopher Papson, Johnny Perona, John the Fish. I like that one. David Crane. I'm going to start calling that guy David Fraser Crane, of course.
I remember Fraser. It was a fantastic series.
John Shreve. Frankie's favorite, the Cretin. Anthony.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He's on there. Anthony.
Hi, Cretin.
There you go. Anthony Del Preet. Brian Sanford. Porter Kropf. Jesse Calton. I know a lot of these names from Instagram. I think Frank Pomus or Pomes. I don't know how to say your last name. Sorry, Frank. Sarah Markham, Mike Chillian, and Andrew Moran.
Some old timers there.
If you want to
that's an impressive list, man. What a bunch of kick-ass people that are all Patreon subscribers. That's killer.
Right. And if you want to join the fun, patreon.com/primustracks. And I'll end it with this. I love it when a scheme comes together because you've been tracked. Next time, Frankie, bring your dream journal.
Truly looking forward to the dream because it received a lot of negative comments when it was first released, but I think it has been assessed incorrectly. We'll get into that the next week.
Great teaser. Luke Bemand, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time, Luke, and for playing the track for us.
Of course, my
Truly
pleasure, guys.
appreciate it.
Anytime, boys. My pleasure. Shout out all the Patreons, everyone out there in Primus Tracks world.
Yeah.
Great to be a part of it.
Thank you, Patreons.
And Luke, where can we find you on the World Wide Web?
I'm on the internet. You can follow me on Instagram at Luke Bemand Bass, or you can follow my band at Lespecial Music.
Later days.
Willie Mays.
Now we're clear. We can cuss all we want.
Fuck.